Let's look at inspecting the animal carburetor. The carburetor's role is to mix air and fuel together in proper proportions so that the engine can efficiently burn this charge. Modifications to the carburetor can allow more air to enter the engine, giving a competitor an unfair advantage on the track. This group of specific checks is to assure that alterations to the carb have not been done. Some checks to the carb can be done with it still installed on the engine. This is a good feature when a quick check is all that's required. Start by removing the air cleaner. Do a visual inspection to make sure nothing has been done to direct air into the carburetor. After removing the air cleaner, do a quick inspection of the carburetor. Make sure that it is installed tight on the engine. Check that the plate covering the choke lever is in place. Use a flashlight to look inside the venturi and check for any type of machining or alterations that may have been done. Check them against a known good carburetor if needed. Now take a look at the slide itself. Look for any noticeable modifications. Measure the length of the slide at the shortest point. The length should be 1.148 inches maximum. Now remove the slide needle by pushing it out of the top, being careful not to damage it. The slide brow is checked using a flat piece of bar stock and a .075 inch pin gauge. When the slide is set flat against the bottom edge, the .075 inch pin gauge cannot pass through the cutaway area. The slide needle has a check for its taper. To do this, stick it into tool number A4, which has a .070 inch hole and is a ½ inch thick. The needle cannot protrude out of the end of this gauge block. The overall length as measured with calipers cannot exceed 1.692 inches. The inlet and venturi dimensions can also both be checked with the carb on the engine. The inlet is checked with a no-go gauge at the biggest part of entry. Use tool number A7 and make sure that the 1.149 inch gauge doesn't pass through. The venturi is the smallest section of the carburetor. This is where the main fuel metering is done and is the most critical of all carb measurements. There are 3 checks to be done on the venturi. The first is a vertical check using no-go gauge A8. This .794 inch gauge must not pass through the carb. The second is a horizontal check done both above and below the center line of the horizontal plane. Use no-go gauge A8 and make sure it doesn't pass through. The final venturi check is done with a tool horizontal and in the center of the venturi. Use tool A20 and make sure that this .602 inch no-go does not pass through. Next, we need to check the air pickoff tube. This is a no-go check using tool A9, which has a diameter of .061 inches. Make sure it doesn't pass through into the brass tube extending into the carburetor inlet area. The final check on the carb can be done with it off the engine. Remove the carb using 2 10mm wrenches. Once removed, check to make sure the O-ring gasket is in place. The final check is done on the outlet diameter of the carburetor. Use gauge A7 and make sure it doesn't pass into the carb. The carb nozzle protrudes into the venturi at the bottom and is measured using tool AT343. The tool is a round pin gauge that is cut away at both ends. The short end is a .040 inch and is used as a no-go for the nozzle height. The big end is a .060 inch and is used as a must-go for the nozzle. Simply slide the tool along the bottom of the venturi to verify the heights. This concludes the inspection of the animal carburetor.